In the pre-dawn darkness of the Taiwan Strait, two titans of modern naval warfare found themselves locked in a deadly dance of proximity and power. The USS Chung-Hoon, an Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyer, cut through the choppy waters at 23 knots when her radar operators detected an approaching signature. What happened next would become one of the most dangerous naval encounters of the 21st century, as China's Type 052D destroyer Liang closed to within 150 yards of the American warship, close enough for sailors on both vessels to see each other's faces in the moonlight. The Chinese captain had just demonstrated Beijing's willingness to risk everything in a game of maritime chicken that could have triggered World War III with a single miscalculation. But this terrifying encounter was merely the surface manifestation of a far deeper strategic reality that has been reshaping global power dynamics for over 2 decades. Beneath the waves and beyond the horizon, the People's Liberation Army Navy has been quietly assembling what Pentagon analysts call the most formidable anti-ship missile arsenal in human history. The DF-21D and DF-26 missiles, dubbed carrier killers by Western intelligence, represent China's ambitious attempt to push American naval power beyond the first island chain and challenge 7 decades of U.S. maritime dominance in the Pacific. Yet despite Beijing's massive investment in these hypersonic weapons of unprecedented destructive capability, a closer examination reveals why the United States Navy's defensive systems continue to maintain a crucial technological edge that could determine the outcome of any future conflict in the South China Sea. The morning of that fateful encounter began like countless others in the Taiwan Strait, with routine freedom of navigation operations that have become the front line of an undeclared naval Cold War. The USS Chung-Hoon, named after Rear Admiral Gordon Chung-Hoon, who earned the Navy Cross at the Battle of Leyte Gulf, was conducting her standard patrol when Chinese naval vessels began what appeared to be coordinated harassment maneuvers. The Type 052D destroyer, hull number 161, emerged from the pre-dawn haze with her distinctive stealth-optimized superstructure and vertical launch systems clearly visible to American lookouts. What followed was a masterclass in naval brinksmanship as both captains tested the resolve and reflexes of their counterparts in international waters that China increasingly considers its own territorial sea. The Chinese destroyer's aggressive approach was no random act of maritime aggression, but rather a carefully calculated demonstration of the People's Liberation Army Navy's growing confidence in its ability to challenge American naval supremacy. The Type 052D represents the cutting edge of Chinese naval engineering, equipped with the HHQ-9 surface-to-air missile system, YJ-18 anti-ship cruise missiles, and sophisticated radar arrays capable of tracking multiple targets simultaneously across hundreds of nautical miles. As the Chinese warship closed to within 150 yards of the Chung-Hoon's starboard beam, her crew was sending an unmistakable message that Beijing no longer views the Taiwan Strait as an American lake where U.S. Navy vessels can operate with impunity. This dangerous game of naval chicken reflects the broader strategic transformation that has been reshaping the balance of power in the Western Pacific since China's economic miracle began accelerating in the 1990s. The People's Liberation Army Navy has grown from a coastal defense force primarily focused on protecting China's immediate shoreline to a blue water navy capable of projecting power across vast oceanic distances. The Type 052D destroyers, of which China has constructed over 25 hulls in less than a decade, represent Beijing's determination to field a modern fleet capable of challenging American carrier strike groups in their own backyard. Each destroyer carries 64 vertical launch cells loaded with a devastating array of surface-to-air missiles, anti-ship weapons, and land attack cruise missiles that can engage targets across multiple domains simultaneously. Yet the true revolution in Chinese naval strategy extends far beyond these impressive surface combatants to encompass what Pentagon planners consider the most serious threat to American naval dominance since the development of nuclear weapons. The DF-21D and DF-26 anti-ship ballistic missiles, launched from mobile platforms deep within mainland China, can theoretically strike aircraft carriers and other high-value targets at ranges exceeding 4,000 kilometers. These weapons represent a fundamental shift in naval warfare philosophy, allowing a land-based military to threaten sea-based platforms that have dominated maritime operations for nearly a century. The DF-26 in particular has earned the sobriquet Guam Killer for its ability to reach American naval bases thousands of miles from the Chinese coast with conventional or nuclear warheads capable of devastating even the most heavily defended installations. The psychological impact of these carrier killer missiles cannot be understated in terms of their strategic significance for regional power dynamics. American aircraft carriers have served as the ultimate expression of global military reach since World War II, projecting American power to distant shores and providing policymakers with flexible response options to international crises. The mere threat that these floating cities of 80,000 tons displacement could be destroyed by ballistic missiles launched from a Chinese mainland has forced Pentagon strategists to reconsider fundamental assumptions about naval warfare that have guided American military doctrine for generations. A single successful strike against a Nimitz or Ford-class carrier would not only eliminate 5,000 sailors and airmen, but also destroy aircraft and equipment worth over $13 billion while dealing a catastrophic blow to American military prestige. However, the apparent vulnerability of American naval forces to Chinese missile strikes masks a far more complex reality regarding the technological and tactical challenges inherent in successfully targeting moving naval platforms across oceanic distances. The kill chain required to successfully engage an aircraft carrier with a ballistic missile involves a sophisticated sequence of detection, tracking, targeting, and guidance systems that must operate flawlessly across hundreds or thousands of miles of contested airspace and electromagnetic spectrum. Chinese satellites and over-the-horizon radar systems must first locate carrier strike groups operating under strict emission control protocols designed to minimize their electronic signatures. The information must then be transmitted to missile command centers where targeting solutions are calculated and launch sequences initiated, all while American electronic warfare systems attempt to jam, spoof, or otherwise disrupt Chinese communications networks. The technical complexity of hitting a maneuvering aircraft carrier with a ballistic missile becomes even more daunting when considering the multiple layers of defensive systems that protect American naval task forces. The Aegis combat system, which equips the Arleigh Burke destroyers like the USS Chung-Hoon, represents perhaps the most sophisticated air defense network ever deployed, capable of tracking and engaging hundreds of airborne threats simultaneously across ranges exceeding 200 nautical miles. Each Aegis-equipped destroyer can launch standard missile interceptors with kill probabilities exceeding 90% against ballistic missiles in their terminal phase, while the ship's phalanx close-in weapons system provides a last line of defense against any threats that penetrate the outer defensive perimeter. The integration of multiple defensive platforms within a carrier strike group creates overlapping fields of fire that dramatically complicate any Chinese attempt to achieve mission kill against high-value targets. A typical American naval task force includes not only the aircraft carrier itself, but also multiple Aegis destroyers and cruisers, each carrying between 90 and 122 vertical launch cells loaded with defensive missiles. The combined defensive firepower of such a formation can engage dozens of incoming ballistic missiles simultaneously, while maintaining sufficient reserves to counter follow-on attacks or deal with unexpected tactical developments. Moreover, the F-35C Lightning II fighters operating from carrier flight decks can intercept Chinese missiles during their boost phase when they are most vulnerable to kinetic intercept systems. Perhaps most importantly, the electromagnetic warfare capabilities of American naval forces provide a decisive advantage that Chinese military planners have yet to fully overcome despite massive investments in counter-stealth and cyber warfare technologies. The AN/SLQ 32 electronic warfare suite installed aboard American destroyers and cruisers can jam, deceive, or disrupt the guidance systems of incoming missiles while simultaneously coordinating defensive responses across multiple platforms. Chinese DF-21D and DF-26 missiles rely on active radar homing in their terminal phase, making them vulnerable to sophisticated jamming techniques that can cause guidance systems to lose track of their intended targets or engage false signatures generated by American decoy systems. The intelligence war that surrounds these technological capabilities represents another crucial dimension of the strategic competition between American and Chinese naval forces. American surveillance satellites and reconnaissance aircraft continuously monitor Chinese missile deployments, tracking mobile launchers and analyzing their operational patterns to develop countermeasures and defensive strategies. The National Security Agency's ability to intercept Chinese military communications provides vital intelligence about missile targeting protocols and launch procedures that allows American naval commanders to anticipate and prepare for potential attacks. This intelligence advantage becomes particularly significant during crisis situations when the ability to predict Chinese military intentions can mean the difference between successful defense and catastrophic surprise. The cat-and-mouse game between Chinese offensive missiles and American defensive systems has driven both nations to invest enormous resources in gaining marginal advantages that could prove decisive in any future conflict. China has responded to American defensive improvements by developing maneuverable re-entry vehicles that can change course during their terminal approach, making intercept calculations significantly more difficult for defending systems. The DF-26 missile can reportedly execute evasive maneuvers while approaching its target at hypersonic speeds exceeding Mach 5, creating engagement windows measured in seconds rather than minutes for defending forces attempting to achieve successful intercepts. Yet American technological innovation has consistently stayed one step ahead of Chinese advances through continuous upgrades to defensive systems and the development of new intercept technologies specifically designed to counter ballistic missile threats. The Standard Missile 6, now entering fleet service aboard Aegis destroyers, combines the range and speed necessary to engage ballistic missiles during their mid-course phase with advanced guidance systems capable of home-on-jam modes that actually use Chinese electronic countermeasures against them. The integration of artificial intelligence and machine learning algorithms into American defensive systems allows for real-time adaptation to enemy tactics that would have required months of analysis and programming modification in previous generations of military technology. The economic dimensions of this technological competition reveal another critical advantage that favors American defensive systems over Chinese offensive capabilities. Each DF-26 missile carries a unit cost estimated by intelligence analysts at between $50 and $70 million, making them extremely expensive tools for achieving tactical objectives against defended targets. In contrast, American defensive missiles like the Standard Missile 3 and Standard Missile 6 cost between $3 and $15 million per unit, creating a favorable exchange ratio that allows American forces to maintain defensive saturation even against sustained Chinese ballistic missile attacks. The mathematics of attrition warfare strongly favor the defending force when defensive interceptors cost 1/5 as much as the offensive weapons they are designed to destroy. The strategic implications of this technological balance extend far beyond the immediate tactical considerations of missile defense to encompass broader questions about regional stability and the future of American alliance relationships in the Indo-Pacific region. Chinese development of carrier killer missiles was explicitly designed to create an area denial capability that would prevent American naval intervention in any conflict over Taiwan or the South China Sea. However, the continued effectiveness of American defensive systems maintains the credibility of extended deterrence commitments to allies like Japan, South Korea, and the Philippines who depend on American security guarantees for their national survival. The knowledge that Chinese missiles cannot reliably eliminate American naval forces preserves the strategic balance that has prevented major power conflict in East Asia for over 7 decades. The human element in this technological competition cannot be overlooked when analyzing the true effectiveness of both Chinese offensive systems and American defensive capabilities. The sailors manning Chinese missile batteries and American naval vessels represent years of intensive training and professional development that determines whether sophisticated weapons systems perform according to their theoretical specifications. American naval personnel benefit from decades of operational experience gained through continuous deployments and exercises that provide realistic training in complex electronic warfare environments. Chinese military personnel, despite their technical proficiency and dedication, lack comparable operational experience against sophisticated adversaries employing advanced countermeasures and defensive systems. The morning encounter between the USS Chung-Hoon and the Chinese Type 052D destroyer serves as a powerful metaphor for the broader strategic competition playing out beneath the surface of seemingly routine naval operations. Both vessels represent the pinnacle of their respective nations' technological achievements, crewed by professional sailors trained to operate some of the most complex weapons systems ever deployed at sea. Yet the true measure of their effectiveness lies not in their individual capabilities, but in their integration within larger networks of sensors, weapons, and command systems that span continents and encompass domains from the ocean depths to the edges of space. The Chinese destroyer that came within 150 yards of the American warship that morning was making a statement about Beijing's willingness to challenge American naval dominance through increasingly aggressive tactics that risk triggering the very conflict both sides claim to want to avoid. However, the deeper strategic reality revealed by analysis of Chinese carrier killer missiles and American defensive systems suggests that pronouncements of American naval decline may be premature. The technological and tactical advantages that have allowed American naval forces to dominate the world's oceans for the past century continue to evolve and adapt to new threats in ways that maintain critical margins of superiority. As both naval titans continue their dangerous dance in the waters of the Taiwan Strait, the ultimate question remains whether technological superiority will prove sufficient to deter a Chinese leadership increasingly convinced that time favors their rising power over America's supposed decline. The morning that changed everything may have already passed, witnessed only by sailors whose steady hands on their weapons systems held the fate of two great nations in the balance. But the final chapter of this story has yet to be written in the disputed waters where empires rise and fall with each turn of the tide. History teaches us that the transition from one naval hegemon to another has rarely occurred without bloodshed, and the current standoff between American and Chinese forces carries echoes of previous great power competitions that ultimately exploded into global conflict. The difference today lies not merely in the sophistication of the weapons involved, but in the speed at which miscalculation could escalate from a single aggressive maneuver to nuclear exchange, leaving both civilizations as radioactive monuments to the folly of believing that technology alone can substitute for wisdom in the conduct of international affairs. In these contested waters, where ancient trade routes now serve as potential battlegrounds for 21st century superpowers, the choices made by naval commanders in the coming months may determine whether the Pacific Ocean becomes humanity's graveyard or continues to serve as the highway for global prosperity that has defined our modern era.